bit quicker video this week than in the past, as we really only have to discuss the presentation details and give you a couple tips for presentations moving forward. The first bold item gives you some information on the presentation. You can pause the video here and read this, so I won't. What I do want to encourage you to get in the habit of doing is to take a provided rubric and use that as the outline of your presentation. To help motivate this tip, put yourself in the viewpoint of the grader. The grader is watching and listening to your presentation and trying to evaluate what you are talking about relative to the rubric. Following the rubric will help the grader know when you are complete with the thought and ready to move on to the next thought. Contrast this to a presentation that moves all over the place and bounces back and forth between categories as outlined in the rubric. The grader will have a difficult time scoring the different categories as well as listen to the presentation. The natural tendency is to award less points if the evaluator is confused. The opposite of that is to say that a grader is much more likely to award more points if he or she is less confused. So help the graders be less confused by sticking to the rubric. Likewise, the rubric has a breakdown of points. You can think that this point breakdown directly relates the importance of those categories to the overall presentation. Use this to your advantage when outlining how much time to devote to any category. For our presentation here, every 5 points corresponds to roughly 1 minute. Another good rule of thumb is 1 minute per slide. So for a rubric category that is worth 5 points, devote approximately 1 slide and 1 minute to that category. This will help keep the audience's attention long enough for you to convey the relevant material before moving on to the next slide. Presentations that have more than 1 slide per minute get very difficult to follow as the audience is unable to digest the slide contents and listen to the spoken material before being asked to move on to the next slide. Here's a screenshot of the relevant rubric items. What I would like to point out is the connection of these rubric items to the design process. Again, following this outline to your presentation will make the graders' lives more pleasant, but also give you an opportunity to demonstrate your knowledge of the design process. So state and interpret the requirements for the design is helping you develop requirements. The portion of your project where you conducted the design research is related to exploring the solution space, as we pointed out in a previous video. The design analysis is a preliminary level of analysis, like we mentioned previously. You can see where that fits in with the design cycle. And then lastly, the design deliverables in this case would be to analyze the prototyping, the scale model result, compare it to some of the theoretical developments that you've been able to make, and then also the future studies that you would anticipate based on your understanding of the design cycle, how these future studies would lead into more of the detailed design and the advanced modeling and suggested prototypes is important information that you can convey as part of your presentation. Now on to some tips and tricks and useful resources. Techclip.com is a very useful website for putting in LaTeX-based equations and generating an image that can be dropped in a presentation to make it look very professional. I find this quicker and more professional looking than using either equation editor in PowerPoint or Google Slides. Also another tip, copy and paste the tech code that you used in Techclip into the comment section of your presentation so that you can quickly modify the equations in the future if needed. I'll provide the code for this Techclip picture that talks about the thermal radiation aspects in the comments section of the presentation slides for you to copy and paste. Another handy website related to using text syntax to generate professional quality images for your presentation is Tablesgenerator.com. Now you don't have to use either of these resources, but if you're familiar with LaTeX, you may find these resources as useful as I have moving forward in your career. Now, if you've ever looked at someone else's Matlab plot in a presentation, you're probably familiar with the fact that Matlab's default figure generation is not the most friendly to generate readable figures for either presentations or reports. There's a lot of ways to increase the readability and professional looking nature of the Matlab plots. I provided some code on this slide that you are welcome to use. If you don't believe me that the lower figure looks better than the upper one, do this. Pause the video right now and take 5 steps back from your screen. What figure can you more easily read? I rest my case. This gets to the final point of what figures to include in a presentation and what to do with them. Don't include a figure just for the sake of including the figure. And you should also discuss what is meaningful about the figure. For example, if I were presenting this slide, I wouldn't want to say, here's the plot of balloon thickness versus factor of safety, and then leave it at that. Instead, I want to draw the attention to what is meaningful about the figure. Try, instead, here's a plot of the balloon thickness versus factor of safety. For lower factors of safety, the balloon thickness increases, which is consistent with our governing equation shown previously. But as the factor of safety of around 7, the necessary thickness begins to drop off. This is counterintuitive and necessitated that we looked into the output more. What we found was, which means blah, 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 blah. Now, I don't want to give away the answer to this observation here, as it is something you should discuss in your group. But the point being is you should be able to look at a plot, compare it to some theoretical understanding, and convey that message to your audience. That's the end of this presentation.